All right, thank you guys so much. I am back. Thankfully, I have recovered from my little illness. I usually don't get sick very often. I try to run as much as possible and, eat your vitamins and crap. But clearly that didn't work. So I do really apologize. Thank you guys so much for your patience. I know I bet you guys were a little frustrated with the kind of inconsistent schedule with Gebser this week, or the past couple weeks. I do really apologize. I really was planning on getting you guys 2 Gebsers in a week, and then I just was absolutely destroyed by that cold. The only good thing about it was I was confined to the couch, so I was able to rewatch Apocalypse Now, which was good because I haven't seen that since I was like 17. And I remember liking it back then, but I was just getting into movies, so I didn't quite have the repertoire to, I guess, analyze it. And I enjoyed it a lot. I thought it was very good. Which that was like the one good thing. I even had to call out of work. It was terrible. But besides that, we are back. Thank you guys for your patience. And today, there might be a change in the Gebser schedule insofar as I might not release them on Mondays or Tuesdays. I might do maybe Wednesdays after work, Thursday, Friday. The reason why is because my schedule has changed and I have less time in a rational time, in an extensity, a measurable sense, to do this. I still should have enough to get at least 1 week, one a weekend, and I should have enough time. Don't worry. I'm still going to plan on recording and releasing videos, but there might be a slight change there, so I do apologize. And without further ado, let's get right into it. So right now, if you're in this edition, we are on page 344. We are on the new concepts. So, by the way, just to give you a warning, we're going to be getting into some crazy ideas here for a second. There's an idea in here that is so out there that if I didn't have 333 preceding pages of absolute genius, I would dismiss it on its face. I would dismiss it my inner rationalist would come in and say, that's bullshit, and I would dismiss it on its face. I'll let you decide. So it's some interesting stuff. But today we're going to talk about the new concepts and the inceptions of new consciousness. That'll be the first section. And after that, we're going to be getting into the 4th dimension. So more or less, we're going to be diving into the shallow end at least. All right. Without further ado, let's begin. Quote, before we examine the manifestations of the new consciousness, we must understand what they are to be found and in what forms they occur. Where they are to be found, excuse me, I don't know what they are to be found. Let me try that again. Before we examine the manifestations of the new consciousness, we must understand where they are to be found and in what forms they occur. Seems reasonable enough. We will not be able to lay hold of these systematically and will therefore have to devise schemata with which to organize them in a way that is commensurate with the principal motif of the new manifestations. Such an approach is provided by the concept of systasis, the conjoining of parts into an integral whole. Remember, systasis. It's very similar to a reconciliation, like what the rationalists do, because you are making whole, but you're doing it in a way that's integral. It transcends the rules of rationality. One systatic concept is that of temporic concretion. One of its forms of expression, the most pervasive in fact, is the 4th dimension. We'll begin into that next week. We shall have to consider both of these briefly if we are to have a basis for our verification, for it is no longer possible to rely exclusively on a methodology. By proceeding methodologically, we could at the very most achieve a systemization of the new manifestations, but this would defeat our purpose inasmuch as a systemization spatializes whatever it encompasses. There you go. We would again find ourselves within the 3-dimensional realm instead of having advanced into the 4-dimensional sphere. And that's the point I brought up. If you guys watched my interview with Adam from the channel Unthink Me, You Are the Man. I love you, Adam. Thank you so much for that. That was the point I brought up. I get a little worried sometimes when we don't talk about time as an intensity, that we've only have 1 foot in the integral camp. When you have 1 foot in the integral camp, ironically, you don't have a foot in any camp. But when you have both feet in the integral camp, you have a foot in all camps. It's very paradoxical, right? So you would think, well, if I have 1 foot in the mental structure and 1 foot in the integral structure, what's the problem? It's better than having 2 in 1, because now I have both, right? Yes and no. What you've done is internalizes the spatial enrichment aspect, which is essentially just the idea of, well, why don't we take all these structures, kind of balance them and put them into a whole and then employ them based on our discernments in the real world. That's great. That's not there's nothing wrong with that. It's just one part of it. It's like a third of it, if I'm being a rationalist for a second. So paradoxically, when you have both feet in the seat of integral consciousness, you have both feet in all seats of consciousness. And remember, as I remind you, a paradox is not a regression to the irrational. It is not. We have talked about this in this series, but just as a reminder, what it is a transcendence in the form of balancing and respecting the co-validity of rational and irrational. Remember, in paradox, the irrational gets a rational order, and the rational gets an irrational stamp. It's co-validity. It's integral balance. So that's a very dangerous game, and that's something I've had my eye on. I try a lot of what is going on in the name of anti-rationalism. I don't want to make this too political, but you see this with the right. What it really is a regression into the mythical structure or the magic structure. So you always have to keep an eye on that. Just as my little Gebser army, as I like to talk, you need to keep your eyes out for people who essentially give you a bunch of irrational nonsense and try to call that irrationality, who essentially just regress back into their deficient psyche or the deficient magic structure and try to bullcrap me and tell me that we're transcending. You negating rationality, you negating logic is not a transcendence. That's a regression. So drop that. By introducing systasis into simple methodology, we are able to evince a new quote-unquote method, which is no longer three-dimensional. This new method, that's a good way of putting it. So essentially what we're doing is 4D irrational systematizing. Think of what a rational system does and do that, but just transcend the rules of rationality, and you've got it. This new method is four-dimensional diaphany. In this, what is merely conceivable and comprehensible becomes transparent. Diaphany is based on syneresis, on the etiological completion of systasis and system into an integral whole, for integrality is only possible where temporal elements and spatial magnitudes are brought together syneretically. So as all these systatic concepts, these systatic functions, systatic ideas, eventually they're going to complete itself into a whole, and that is syneretic perception, the integral whole, to be aware of all of that. And that's a really, really beautiful way he phrases this too. Only possible where temporal, so time as an intensity, and spatial magnitudes are brought together syneretically. So notice the integral function. I was going to say polar complementarity, but that might not be the best word. The integral. We're not doing the deficient rational pitting these against one another. We're done with that crap. If we also take into account the systatic concepts, the mere methodology of systems is intensified to syneretic diaphany, and this must be achieved unless we are to remain caught in the three-dimensional scheme of thought. Don't get too lost in all these big words. That's what the whole rest of this book's going to be fleshing out. Before turning to the two motifs of the fourth dimension and temporic concretion, we must first briefly examine the two inceptions of the new consciousness. The one is spiritual, the other physical. We have already touched on the spiritual inception. It is the altered relation of the creative individual to creativity itself since the decade of 1790, 1800. So what we talk about in the past two videos. The switch from the classic rational muse way of doing poetry to the spiritual recognition of creativity as an originary phenomenon. The change, as we noted, is primarily the altered attitude toward one phenomenon of time, recollection. This renunciation of recollection, it must be noted, is not an attempt to repress recollection, but to supersede it, kind of like what I was talking about earlier. The supersession is at the same time a submersion into timelessness and the drawing up into our measurable time, characteristic of earlier creativity. Give way to the attempt to achieve the new obligation or the new task of devoir by clarity, transparency, and intensified awareness. This new spiritual inception is the new source to which the new manifestations owe their possibility of manifestation. We have verified this new source as it pertains to the realm of poetry, but it is only natural that the altered form of creative effectuation, and its altered form which taps new energies for its use, is not restricted merely to poetry. So this creative originary energy that generates these new structures, the new way of doing things, obviously it's not going to just apply to poetry. And he talks about... obviously, we talked about the spiritual aspect of poetry, right? What was that one line from, who was it, Holderlin, where he said the true spirit is not concerned with itself or whatever. It's good stuff. A similar achievement can be assumed for the originators of new conceptions in other fields, as is evident in physics from the account of de Broglie. I don't know. I'm like Adam Driver in the movie Silence. I don't know if that's Portuguese, French, or Italian, baby. The founder of wave mechanics, in which he describes the realization of new concepts. So this guy, de Broglie, discovered or founded wave mechanics, and this wave mechanics is a completely new way of doing things. And I remember watching, when I learned more about the scientific kind of Einstein space-time unification, I went and watched a little bit on Netflix had this show, and I was really hoping they would get into how he did that. And you just have some actor playing Einstein. He goes, it was a completely new way of viewing the world. And I was like, okay, well, that's kind of what I was looking for. Okay. But that's kind of the point. It really is a new concept insofar as it completely transcends the traditional rational triangular thought. The question now arises whether there is a new physical inception which corresponds to this new spiritual one. For there is always a tendency that those things which are constellated in the realm of the imperceptible become visible directly in the realm of the most tangible, as above, so below. We can thus surmise that the physical structure of man is changing, and not just his spiritual structure, and that there is a similar mutation taking place. Excuse me. It is surely somewhat risky to speak of changes in man's physiological structure today which can be verified as being mutational in origin, but it is permissible at least to indicate this possibility. We can, for example, discern a definite alteration in posture if we compare mythical with mental men. So what we're going to be doing here is we are going to... Obviously, these new consciousness structures affect our internal faculties, right? Whether it be the soul with the mythical structure, the new rationality with the mental. Obviously, internal, it's messing all these things up. And of course, when we externalize these internal changes, we get the world as we see today. Not only that, there is going to be a change in the physiology, the physiological makeup of man. If this came from anyone other than Gebser, I would be calling BS. But so here's one of the pictures. I want to make sure you can see it here. So you see here, it's very subtle. Let me try. It's very subtle, but the person on, oh God, what are you looking at? Your right is mental man, and the person on your left is mythical man. I want you to look very carefully and try to pick up some subtle distinctions, though don't feel bad if you can't, because they're very subtle. So just leave it up for a second, and there you go. Okay, so those are the ones we're going to be examining. Let's see. Two Tangara figurines demonstrate this graphically. The one from the mythical attitude dates from the 4th century BC, the one from the mental from the 3rd century BC. Both are representations of Persephone. The differences in posture and bearing are quite apparent. So spoiler, that was the answer. The earlier figurine shows evidence of a distinctly nature-oriented rhythm, while the later one, recognizably upright in posture, guess what that one belongs to, shows a bearing with raised head and not the former stance of a head bowed in dreams of lunar configuration. Remember, rational is diurnal waking consciousness. All this dream stuff, that's the unconscious, the subconscious, the left, the mythical left side. The mythical right is the rational side. We are up, we are above water, we are clear, as evident by the tilted upward and set and straight head from mythical pre-perspectival man as contrasted by, mental pre-perspectival man as contrasted by mythical unperspectival man. We have here a structural differentiation illustrating the increased and consolidated consciousness of self. the Greeks' greater sense of ego as a result of the mutation from the mythical to the mental structure. The awakening to the mental consciousness, which is repeated in Europe in the 10th and 11th centuries AD, is also evident in an obvious way in the pictorial arts of that period. The mutation which European man recapitulates during those centuries has its visible manifestation as in the 6th to 3rd centuries BC in Greece in the smile which the Romanesque Madonnas are still lacking, which is already beginning to show in the countenance of the early Gothic Madonnas and which reaches its full radiance in those of the 13th century. And whereas the child is still placed in the center of the depiction and thus forms an unquestioned and undisturbed unity with the Madonnas of the early Romanesque era, the later depictions show that clearly discernible shift of position towards the right and away from the center, so that the child now emphasizes the right side of the figure. Remember, we talked about this in the mental structure video all the way in the beginning. Right, the mythical right, is the side that privileges, that rationality privileges. It is the Apollonian principle. Diurnal awakened consciousness, measured rational thought, rational restrainment, boundary creation, which of course makes sense with the objective hierarchy stuff going on with mental stuff. That is the mythical right. Think Nietzsche, Dionysian, Apollonian. You've got it perfectly. When the child shifts from the center of the frame to the right, and it seems that the right side of the frame is being, the space in there is being filled, that is a signal. And it takes someone who knows what he's talking about, also someone who respects deeply mythology and the other aspects of the human condition, postmodernists who don't go in there and just cynically deconstruct everything because you're a resentful loser. These are the connections you can make if you're Gebser when you're doing this honestly from a point of extreme intelligence and good faith. Now, this isn't to say you can't disagree. You can, by the way, if you think all this is quack, that's fine. You're more than within your right to feel that way. I'm just saying, at least he's making an honest effort. But that shift from center to right, just like if it would be a shift from right to left, which we're seeing, hello Derrida, that is a signal. It is not just a coincidence. Away from the center so that the child now emphasizes the right side of the figure. The shift of emphasis breaks up the circular enclosure. The mythical circle and the non-perspectival world are torn apart, and mental directedness and the emphasis on the right come to the fore and are reflected by the smiling countenance which is awakening to itself. So, the shift of emphasis breaks up the circular enclosure. I think you guys know what that is a reference to. Early depictions of the Madonna often show the child being held, or still being held, on the left or heart side, while later depictions of the mental age almost invariably show it on the right. Okay, I'm not going to repeat this too often. With the mythical times, we privilege the left, the unconscious, right? That's the soul. That's in that area. It's not in this diurnal, waking, rational stuff. That's the left. Now we do the right. Beautiful. While in these two examples, it is primarily the posture that evinces a mutational change of inner structure, specifically of the structure of consciousness, perhaps we can find a conspicuous symptom of a purely physical kind to verify the same change. What I'm about to read you is what I would imagine someone who heard Mozart or witnessed a Van Gogh or Michelangelo painting for the first time, where you just see this guy. He's got one ear, the other one's bleeding like a fountain, and he created something that it's so different from what you see, and you want to dismiss it as nonsense, but then you realize, I think I'm talking to a genius. I think I'm talking to like a mad genius, because this is just insane. What I'm about to read you is insane. So now, instead of just pictorial arts, which is relatively easy for Gebser, we're going to talk about differences in physiology based on the new structures. In a physical sense. Such a symptom is given by the surprising formation of the Greek forehead. We are referring to the definite outward formation of the cerebrum in the frontal bone and the concurrent decrease in volume of the posterior cranium. The ancient Egyptian profile still shows a receding forehead, and it is significant that the Egyptian, bound to magic and myth, restricted the development of the protruding forehead, and consequently of the cerebrum, by bandaging and thus making it possible. Look what I wrote in my notes here. I just wrote, what the fuck? WTF. Okay, so what he's saying is that the Greek forehead, now of course, I'm just going to repeat just for I know you guys know this, but the Greeks were the ones who dominated the pre-perspectival phase, which say they were the first ones to pick up on this rational stuff. Obviously, the rational privilege is the mind, which is somewhere in the head. So when the forehead is enlarged and the cerebrum is enlarged, and we notice that it only happens to the Greeks and it doesn't happen to the Egyptians, who were the kings of the unperspectival world, which is to say the magic and mythical structures. And we also notice that not only do the Egyptians not have a receding forehead, or they have a receding forehead and they don't have a protruded forehead and cerebrum, that they wrap their forehead in bandages as if they are trying to negate its growth, as if the mythical and magical structures are fighting back against the rigidification of the mental structure. Well, sometimes it's staring you right in the goddamn face, and all you have to do is not be a rationalist and just go, yeah, I'm seeing it, sorry. You could say it's stupid or dumb, and woo, yeah, that's nice. Take it up with the spiritual other side. Maybe you guys think this is all bullcrap. More power to you if you do, but I think it's some fascinating stuff. If my idiot neighbor told me this, I would dismiss this out of hand. But because it's Gebser, I'll at least take it seriously, if not uncritically champion it. This binding back of the frontal bone with bandages tied around the heads of children at an early age is still in evidence today among certain native tribes in Africa. So remember my Mondo Kane video? Think that. The protruding frontal bone emerges only gradually among the Greeks of pre-Christian Mediterranean civilization, as can be seen from all depictions from the 7th down to the 4th century BC. There is at first a short, steeply inclined forehead which is covered by the hair brushed forward. But after completion of the mutation in the 4th century, the forehead can be seen in works of Greek pictorial art in its clear, uncovered, and upright resplendence. Imagine describing a forehead like that. I'm getting aroused. A comparison of the profile. Yeah, that's how I know, by the way, that I'm actually a rational genius, because my head is so humongous, and my head has been this size ever since I was a baby, and it took me about 17, 18 years to grow into my head. I think that's actually a sign that I'm just a rational genius. No wonder you guys are subscribed to me, you little peons. Ha ha ha. I own you. I am Goethe. Ha ha ha. Here's the best thing about Gebser. He gives you stuff and he says, yeah, I don't care if you don't like this, but this is true, so I don't care. Here's what he says after. As for our own day, it will be obvious that such change in structure, be they in posture and bearing or in physiognomy, are not yet such that they allow us to draw conclusions about the completion of a mutation. So this is the great thing about Gebser. He is honest. He will tell you when he thinks he knows something. He will tell you when he is ignorant of something. He is not going to give you, let's say you buy what he just said, which I guess I do, but I don't really have much historical. I'd have to investigate it. And you could think, wow, this guy's just a genius. Okay, he's not going to take that and essentially exploit that and start a cult by saying, oh, and look, see this change? I can guarantee you that's because of the... No, you have no idea. And it takes thousands of years or hundreds of years later for you to figure it out. All right, we're going to skip ahead a little bit. For it may well be that someday the design might be more intensive, so intensive that the previous form of man would be inadequate for the realization of the mutation, and that the mutation would not merely bring on incremental capacities in man, but would be by nature completely transforming. The fact that today the question as to the nature of man dominates the field of rational discussion almost exclusively in the form of anthropological or existential points of view is a clear indication that man today, at least nothing but a rational man, has not only become dubious, but is in fact placing himself and his very existence in question. So all the talk that we see in contemporary times, which has only gone up since Gebser wrote this, about human nature, either this is a product of deficient rationality or rationalism that is completely divided and hair split, and, well, hair split all potential meanings of what human nature is, reduced it down to our most primitive animalistic urges and then negated our divine aspects. And now we get all these discussions about, well, what is human nature? That's an indictment of the rationalism. Or it could be seen as the new energies imparted to us by origin in the form of the mutation of integral consciousness. This itself has caused us to reorient how we view human nature, which I think would make sense, because now we're no longer just pre-rational, irrational, rational, now we're irrational. So, we are going to have a new conversation about human nature. And the great thing is we already have the answer, because Gebser has given us the answer. Human nature is, one is a human if they live out the balanced integral whole of the structures. That is to say, when one doesn't carve out one, place it in dualistic opposition against the other, and then privilege it over all others. That's the same mistake. It's obviously the mistake rationalists make. It's the same mistake, by the way, that these red pill Sigma male bros say when, women, they're hypergamous because their evolutionary psychology says that they have to get the one with the most resources, and so they are all hypergamous, so you can't trust anything. They're just no good gold diggers. That's bullcrap. That's the same mistake that the rationalists made. You took the magic structure in this case, sectored it off, separated it from others, and you say, this is it. No, we are more than just our mere instincts, urges, propensities, and tendencies. Miss me with that crap. For the moment, however, it would appear that the previous foundations, those which we have presented in Part 1, are sufficiently strong to provide an adequate basis for a new mutation. It would be premature to speak of the necessity for a complete transformation of man, and thus of Earth, before man gives evidence of his complete and utter failure. So we have to fail utterly and completely before we can really change things. That's nice. It could even be suggested parenthetically that the present-day existentialist line of questioning is a positive indication of the acute state of the impending mutation. Well, of course it is. How could it not be, right? I mean, we're talking about human nature. Maybe existentialism is the irrational integral way of answering this new question about human nature. What do you guys think? But this would be a false interpretation, so that's what Gebser thinks. He does go on to praise existentialism later. By the way, for all you philosophy guys, I know he kind of went a little hard on Heidegger, almost to the point where when you read his critique of Heidegger and then you read his critique of Jung, or on Heidegger, he's just like, remember, what was that line where he said he rationalizes the meaning of all words away to the point where no one can understand anything? You're like, damn, Gebby, like, chill. And, but when he comes to Jung, he's like, I just want to make note that it's a very admirable attempt that he's done to try to transcend 3D, but he's regressed to polar complementarity, but it's really just admirable. He will give these guys credit later on. I think this is just his opportunity to throw shots, but he does give credit to Heidegger later on. He gives credit to the existentialists later on. He'll definitely critique him for sure, but spoiler, the existential focus on experience, well, you guys know what that is. That's magic structure, baby. This line of questioning, so this would be a false interpretation, the interpretation that existentialism could be seen as integral irrational stuff. This line of questioning has simply brought man, as he has been until now, into question, and has ultimately negated man. That is what, unfortunately, modern contemporary existentialism has done. I don't think philosophers quite understand that most... You can call them dumb, and I would agree with you. But I think a lot of people, when they come out of philosophy, unfortunately, they get the idea that literally nothing is true, and everything is just power. It's just whatever you want to call it, social conditioning, whatever it is. I think that's a bit of an indictment of philosophy, I think. Oh, here we go. This is what I was talking about earlier. A negation of what has gone before does not, however, constitute an affirmation of what is now coming to fulfillment, which requires the efficient energies of what has been before for its manifestation. The anthropological and existential doubts about man are a declaration of the bankruptcy of philosophy. Why would he say that? The anthropological, okay, that's man-focused. This is a declaration of the bankruptcy of philosophy, because philosophy will never be able to account for transcendence. And if you can't account for transcendence, then you can't account for man in its true nature. So that is a declaration of the bankruptcy of philosophy. And why he says existential doubts, like I said earlier, all you've done in modern existentialism is just hair split and divided everything, not only the external world, but your internal faculties now. And now you've just regressed back to the magic structure by just going, oh, it's just experience. That's nothing to do with it. Abstract conceptualization isn't important at all, apparently. Okay. So it's a complete bank. Oh, so philosophy fails because, no, if philosophy had the efficient energies of the new structure, you wouldn't have to fail with existentialism. You could just take the existential question and kind of put the irrational, efficient integral working to it and come out with something amazing. But we haven't seen that, obviously. Oh, this is good. Ever since philosophy, announced the death of God, as postulated by Hegel and already anticipated in the Enlightenment, there was reason to believe that it would also have to announce the death of man. This is occurring today in the most degrading and loathsome forms imaginable, the nausea of Sartre, and accompanied by the formlessness of an instinct-driven psychologization of philosophy resulting from the unleashed psyche, whose religio has been destroyed. I think that's a reference to James. I think he talks about James later, but he seems to, I don't know, he gives credit to James, so I'm not entirely sure what he's talking about. This confession of suicide is the admission by the rationally rigidified representatives of our era that they, in their torpidity, are not equal to the new task. So the new task is to meet all the demands of integral consciousness, to stop dividing and start uniting through systasis to form a syneretic perception. To resist falling into the triangular, now deficient mode of doing things, to have knowledge of, in a very almost sober, irrational sense, of the spirit and soul and all this stuff. That's the new task. That's what we need to do. Philosophy has failed so far. So philosophers, get in there and be courageous and bring this stuff up in your classes because you will destroy these people. Expect some pushback, though. The time at which this announcement of the death of God was made is striking. It occurs in the decade following the French Revolution. Fichte's remark that, quote, man is without predicates, unquote, underscores the reduction of God to human proportions and corresponds to the tendency expressed by the French Revolution we can define as the disengagement from patriarchy. So, of course, the patriarch is the king. The king is the prototypical symbol of rationality because he is the individual who has been divided and separated from other individuals, placed in dualistic antithetical opposition to them, and has been privileged over them. This is hierarchy. This is rational stuff. Of course, the French Revolution, as we all know, decapitated that completely, not only literally, but symbolically. So that was the moment where we're done. We're done with your 3D, rational, patriarchal, objective, natural ordering of things. Now, of course, the French Revolution was terrible. So the reason why he's saying that the death of God, there is a reason why the death of God came at this exact time, is because in the same way that the French Revolution were transcending the patriarchy in the form of the king, the atheist enlightenment rationalist crowd was transcending the patriarchy in the form of transcending the rational 3D mental projections that we made onto God. God is a he, God, the Holy Spirit is a person, or whatever it is. I'm not a Christian. So you can see the very clear attempt, at least, to transcend the patriarchy. The Divine Father, or sovereign, was deposed just like the earthly sovereign. It is a parallel to the matricide that did away with matriarchy. Beautifully said. This digression has been necessary to prevent the suspicion that the new mutation may in some way be deemed to be a process of divinization of man. The new energy erupting in man is not might. It does not make him more mighty, but it should make him veritable. It intensifies the awakening consciousness, it lifts man out of his confinement in matter and the psyche, and changes him so that the spiritual becomes transparent to him. I like the way he said that. It lifts man out of his confinement in matter and the psyche. Wherever this increment of energy veers around into power or might, instead of becoming conscious as the new task, it destroys man. Someone who is not equal to the mutation and misinterprets its demand will run around on it, and the negative anthropocentricity of the recent philosophers is a clear demonstration of the truth of this statement. So that philosophy cannot give you transcendence. It's exactly the problem. It's not necessarily the end of the world, okay? If you watch my most recent Kill Rationalism video, this limiting vanishing point, the limiting closed aspect of the vanishing point that we talked about in that series, that applies to every other subject. So don't think I'm picking on philosophers. It's just you guys go around talking about you're universally, okay. Both new inceptions, then, the spiritual as well as the physiological, are to be considered in the sense of a task and not of presumption. Where courage does not go hand in hand with humility, man has thrown away his chance. The wisdom of the church. Now, I'm going to read this. I was originally planning on skipping it. I'm not going to. I won't pretend I'm super knowledgeable on like religious history. Clearly, Gebser is obviously more intelligent, but he does say that religion does a better job than philosophy does at meeting the demands of the new task, and it's obvious why, for the reasons I just explained. Right? Philosophy can't give you transcendence. Religion will give you nothing but, right? The problem is there's a time and place. There's also a time and place to be rational, and unfortunately religion has proven that it hasn't been great, and philosophy has proven, for better or worse, that it is great at that. So, time and place. The wisdom of the church has fulfilled the new obligations of the mutation more wisely than was possible for the mere knowledge of that secularized theology, philosophy. The new dogma of Mary, proclaimed on All Saints' Day, 1950, by Pope Pius XII, can be understood as a renunciation of the overly emphasized father aspect of God that is itself a reduction of the divine. So you took the God and you reduced it to your mental, rational, patriarchal projections. The reinstatement of the maternal principle to its rights, that is, to its lefts, and the reduction of the overemphasis on the paternal principle are a clear indication that the church is striving for recognition of the whole and integral man. So now that we have the patriarchal being demoted a little bit and the matriarchal being promoted, we can see the integral attempt here to balance the whole. The accentuation of the assumption of the body shifts the religious emphasis to the sphere of transfiguration, which, being a transparent process, is one form of spiritual transparency or diaphaneity. The element of transfiguration or spiritual birth is henceforth in the foreground, rather than the crucifixion, the physical death. There's going to be a really interesting point. If you're a Christian, by the way, more power to you. I'm not a Christian. I'm not in your tribe. More power to you. I would love if you continue to join my community. You have a more than welcome seat in this community. We are not hostile towards Christians unless you're a dick about it. Then yeah, I'm going to be hostile to you. But we're not hostile. We're not hostile toward any religion unless you're not cool about it. So if you're a Muslim, great. Hindu, great. Christian, great. I don't particularly care. I'm trying to integrate the whole. Even if you're an atheist, great. I don't care. Will Christianity, in accord with the incipient mutation, change in keeping with the possibilities which are indicated for it? Will the church of the crucified become the church of the risen? Listen to this next question. This is a fascinating. So what he's talking about here is that not only, of course, are we, as we just outlined, the physiological changes, but there is a transfiguration in spirit. Remember, spiritual principle, the other side, is a non-negotiable when it comes to 4D irrational integral stuff. There's just no getting around it. Our view or perception or engagement with the spiritual principle is transforming, and you can see this. I don't want to bring up screw it, never mind. The point is, you're seeing a lot more people, for better or worse, become more spiritually or religiously inclined, even if you think it's irrational nonsense. Will Rome adopt the festival of the resurrection or spiritual birth? Of course, that's Easter, as the more important festival, which has been prepared since patristic times in the Eastern Church, rather than Christmas, the festival of the physical birth. So, of course, in accordance with the limitation and the reduction of the whole to the quantifiably measurable and consciously known, and the privileging of the I, the visual function, as we know, we have cut the heights of the heavens so we can reorient our focus and energies on the terrestrial sphere, the atheist, rational, materialist terrestrial sphere. in accordance with that, the physical birth of Jesus, Christmas, has more importance in America and in the West than the spiritual birth of Jesus, which is, of course, would be the resurrection and Easter. So I think Gebser, what he's saying is eventually, who knows how long it'll take, I think Easter is going to be the new Christmas, my friend, and Christmas is going to be the new Easter. Really just fascinating stuff, in my opinion. It's in my opinion, that's, as a non-Christian, I think that's fascinating. I don't know. It's just brilliant. However this may be, it is inescapable that the proclamation of this new dogma 2 generations ago would have met with the strongest resistance because of the credulity at the time with respect to matter. Today it is rejected only by the mostly strong, rational-oriented religious order and by the rational attitude of ultra-Protestantism. Protestantism, as far as I know, is individual-focused. Obviously, the strong subject, born from discovery of space. You guys got it. Here, too, we can discern an indication of the extent to which the three-dimensional consciousness is exhausted. The dogma of Mary was the most productive and genial response to existentialism, and for this reason we had to consider it. This dogma lends a positive support to the new spiritual inception which we have attempted to evince in our discussion, while it makes even more apparent the exhaustion of philosophy and existentialism. So essentially what he's saying is that Mary's dogma, this new whatever she did, that's better than your rational existentialism. The dogma also articulates the supersession of space and time via its turn toward the spiritual. It is a noble message and an admonition to the quote-unquote new task or obligation to which philosophy up to now has not been equal and on which it now threatens ultimately to founder. It should now be apparent that both of the new inceptions do not justify any kind of claim or demand whatever. They are an obligation. So we're not making any claims, not making any demands. That we have an obligation to meet, and that's all there is to it. It has been our task to underscore this in order to counter from the very outset every hybrid interpretation of these new inceptions. Having done this, we can turn to these new systatic concepts by virtue of which those manifestations that owe their possibility of manifestation to the realization of the new inceptions can be made perceptible. So next week, we're going to be diving in. We're going to be talking about the discovery of science, the discovery of time, proper time, Schweikart, Gauss, Einstein, not this deficient rational mental nonsense. We'll probably be getting into Euclid. I don't know, have we gotten into Euclid yet? I think we have. Yeah, we're going to be getting into the fourth dimension, science. We're going to be talking about Einstein, the ever-expanding balloon of our cosmology, all that stuff. So I love you guys. You guys are the best. I really appreciate your guys' patience hanging in there the past couple days with the lack of videos. I was so sick. It was terrible. Oh, it's terrible. I love you guys, and I will see you soon. I love you.